when they move or whatever.
Yeah, I mean, you hear people talking, and then sort of, what do you have for young marrieds? What do you have for kids? What do you have for youth? What do you have for senior adults? And it's sort of like you picking your favorite department store.
Oh yeah, totally. Yeah, and why I think it is, I think we are such an individualistic society, probably more so than almost any other society in the world right now. So I think it's somewhat inevitable that we see almost every decision that we make as an isolated individualistic decision for myself and my family, rather than something about how I can be part of a cog in a bigger whole, if that makes sense. So I think and I think that churches are built upon seeing people as fundamentally consumers and individualistic rather than communal individuals.
Yeah, I think that's a really good understanding of that, because our culture, I mean, we were talking about Super Bowl earlier and the ads, how big of a cultural, I mean, that's the biggest TV moment in the year. And then people, what is it, about $1 million a second for airtime? Or maybe it's not quite that much, but it's significant capital that's spent on a 30-second ad in the Super Bowl. The thing is, advertising works, and so it's like I buy, therefore I am. And so those things have really affected the way the church looks at its current members, potential people that would join. And so, just this, you talked about McDonald's and the drive-thru, the success of businesses and how we measure success is something that has definitely entered the church. So if we have more people showing up, then this must be good. So we got to do whatever we can to get more people to come. And neither one of us is like, no, I think we had 50 people extra show up this week. We must have been doing something unfaithful. I mean, it's not that mentality, but it's just this pragmatic, whatever works. I think too, do you see other churches who are doing these things that are really appealing to the consumer mentality, and it seems to be working because they're attracting crowds. And so we're going, well, they look successful, and so, well, we've got to do that too. And like just the natural sinful selfishness that we experience as humans, that our culture celebrates. Everybody looking at their own screen, viewing their own media on their own iPhone or whatever it may be. That's what, with your internet plan, you be able to handle up to 10 devices at one time. You think you need 10 devices streaming media at one time? What?
Well, and I think it's interesting. Just one thing to add, I find conviction even in the fact that I think even someone who probably is a little less consumeristic than certain church leaders and certain movements, probably. But I think that I've even been infiltrated by it. I've been impacted by it, even in the way that me, as well as most pastors I know, kind of judge success. And I mean, that's what consumerism is built towards, getting success in numbers and success that you can count. And so, churches think of success as how many people, what are our specific numbers. But when David tried to do that in the Bible, God almost killed David for that. And we think that that's something that we should aspire to.
That's a really, really poignant thing to say. Yeah. And I mean, in one sense, if you how many ever people you have, whether there's 15 or 1,500, those are that many souls that you have an opportunity to minister to. But just because there's a lot of them doesn't mean that necessarily everything is good or that the Lord is smiling on what you're doing. And there can be that misconception. So how mindful should we be of the concerns that this consumer-oriented focus brings? I mean, is there anything to it, or is it just complete garbage?
I don't think it's complete garbage. I think consumerism does allow us to search for where people are and what we need to focus on, not as a way of trying to say that, we're going to replace preaching through the Bible with doing a 10-part series on how to have the best sex life possible, but just which is frequently done. But it does allow things like, for example, of knowing who the people are there and understanding the people in the way that consumerism does seek to do. I mean, we can preach to specific struggles, and we can even preach to the way that consumerism is manifesting in people. But But ultimately, that being said, there is the garbage aspect of it. Of the reality is that what we win people with is what we win them to, which is funny because that's kind of a consumeristic statement in itself. But I think there's a lot of truth in that. If we win,
human.
Yeah, and if we win people with consumerism, we get consumers out of it. And I think it predisposes them to choose the world that offers them more in the immediate. And I think it's especially relevant to young people, youth. I think when we build on a consumeristic model for youth and children's ministry, we're predisposing them to become consumers that will inevitably choose the much better consumer product, which is going to a movie on a Wednesday night or, hanging out with your buddies and getting drunk on a Sunday morning. But I think this is particularly disastrous in that way to those going into the world in a post-Christian age, because I think if we build upon a model where we're offering the best consumer product in the world around us that says that Christianity is bigoted, is evil, and being a Christian is going to be hard, people aren't going to make the hard decision to follow Christ.
That's right. Yeah, I mean, I think there is something there, and you brought out some good points. And things like just being aware of the cleanliness of your facilities, are things inviting, are things done well. Now, I don't mean it's excellent and it's just, we're like professional thing, but I mean, music, for example, it would be helpful to have people who have some level of skill and that they're not having to restart the song constantly because, they're messing up on the piano or the guitar or the organ or whatever you use, or someone that can sing on key. I mean, those are helpful things, and those are different than, we're trying to put on this professional quality experience. I mean, there's churches that talk about the weekend experience. And I mean, I've got a friend who church that was the saying. He was on staff there for a while. He's no longer there, but that was the saying around their office was Sunday's coming, and it was just all about making the, quote, weekend experience the best that it could be. Ironically, or maybe not so ironically, this church did not practice membership. They didn't want to ask people to commit. And then they got to a point where they were struggling some financially, and they're like, hey, we need people to give. But you're not asking them to commit themselves to the church, then you shouldn't be surprised when they're not willing to give up the resources, So, and I think that it can become worshiping the consumer and the visitors and the people that we hope to come to our church or come and stay at our church. That can be the danger, but I don't think it's something you just completely throw it out. So, Tony, what are some notable examples that you've seen of, this consumer mentality driving what the church is doing?
Yeah, I'm going to talk about two. So one, I think of, there was some publicity recently, a couple months ago, of some large churches that are within the denomination that we're in as well, that have decided so that they can have the best Sunday experience. And in their work of preparation to build up to the Sunday experience every week, they needed to take the Sunday after Christmas off to give all their workers that work so hard to make this incredible consumer experience a break after Christmas. So they skipped the Lord's Day because this consumerism exhausted them. But I think also another example is something that's coming back that was so big, and a pastor that kind of came big about 15 years ago. That's podcast is referred to when you look at our podcast sometimes. A pastor about 15 years ago became famous and criticized for taking the cross away from the center stage of the church and for really downplaying the cross in how the church advertises itself. And that's coming back. And I've seen churches that would claim to be otherwise healthy that have undermined the cross to really make things that are more marketable and consumeristic to the world around us. That's not a big fan of the cross anymore.
Oh, those are both good examples, kind of different than what I was expecting. So I heard of a church where the pastor did some sort of stunt on stage where he rode a dirt bike. I don't know if he did it like he flew up in the air or something. Anyway, he rode out there in a dirt bike, which is supposed to be cool. And this church plant, I read a guy's article. A church near him they were planting, and they sent out mailers to people, and they said, "Would you come to church on Sunday if the music didn't, well, quote, suck?" And they said, well, at our church, we play covers of the songs you like and listed off these bands, and we don't Jesus up the lyrics.
Oh, boy.
And it was just this blatant, like, we're just going to play you some music that you like. I've seen churches doing, Super Bowl Sunday or football Sunday, and, come with your favorite football jersey. And this one church, they handed out cups to everyone on football Sunday, and it had a picture of the pastor preaching on it. I just thought, I guess, get behind the fearless leader and let's go. But and I'm sure we could multiply examples. And some of those are more subtle. Some of those are just like almost pitiful, in my opinion, just trying to copy the world. So, I mean, those are some examples that are maybe not so good. How little is too little, do you think, paying attention to people's consumer taste or whatever we want to call that?
I'd say in response to that, I think that we should in some ways allow consumerism to shape style, but not substance. And so in that sense, I do mean little things, So I think, for example, there are some churches that still debate whether we need to have the old hymnals or whether we can incorporate slides and things like that. And I think, in that, there's nothing that's detrimental or nothing that's undermining your teaching by incorporating some styles that are prevalent in our consumer-oriented age. Some of the choices that are made in the world around us. Or even, again, that I don't think there's a need for a pastor to dress up in a suit and tie in a culture that's rarely seen as much. I mean, perhaps you're in a culture where that is common, but I think it's not a compromise to be influenced by consumerism in those aspects. But I think next generation's ministries are a little bit more complicated than what we do because they're not mentioned in the Bible. And so, I don't think, for example, I know of churches that say you have to stick to the strict structure of Acts in any like Wednesday night youth activity you do. And I don't think the Bible specifies the youth activities at all. So
I think too little maybe that you don't ever put yourself in the shoes of an outsider. And so you don't look at things through their lens when they come in, whether they're a Christian or they're just not part of your church, they're not familiar with the lingo, and you just assume everybody knows what they should do, what you're doing, where they're going, and all of that. And again, you're just not welcoming. I think that I've heard the analogy used. If you're practicing hospitality in your own home, you make some effort to clean up. I mean, some people, it's like a museum when you come in there, but everybody, I think, makes some effort to kind of straighten things up. You may, scrub the toilet, whatever. And so there's some aspect of that. You want people to feel welcome and not like, wow, they really don't take care of this. And I just think when you're never, and I think it's an act of love. So Tony, how far is too far? So we've established, what's not enough, and we gave some crazy examples. Most churches are not in the place to have a pastor ride out on a dirt bike or do some of those things. But like, how far is too far, just generally speaking, and thinking even about with next generation stuff with kids and with students?
I think it goes back to the numbers again that I mentioned earlier, because again, I think that's all of what it's built towards. I think no one would ever have to do situations like some of the ridiculous illustrations that we've both given if they were not trying to use that to achieve numbers. And I think when we focus more on numbers than faithfulness, we have gone too far. And I think 1 Corinthians 2, I don't read it much, but I mean, Paul talks about foolishness of the wisdom of God versus the wisdom of the world. And he basically says that, by the world standards, my ministry is a failure. But in the wisdom of God, this is success because it's faithfulness. And I think when we undermine anything of that to promote numbers higher than faithfulness to the Lord, then we have done that. And I think when we compromise our ethics and we compromise our ideals so that we might achieve a consumer advantage, I think that we've gone too far. But I think also when our budget is stretched, not due to ministry, but for consumer items, we've likewise gone too far. And, I don't think this is an extreme example to say that things that are small and things that are just really attractional and consumer-oriented oftentimes take far more of the church budget than even honestly lost people would be comfortable with, in light of knowing what the church is supposed to be for.
That's uncomfortable to think about. I think, when everything is just a byproduct, it's really